big announcement happened yesterday with OpenAI officially becoming a for-profit company. So
Yep.
I think we could jump
Everyone,
right into that.
yeah, everyone has known that's coming. What
Yep.
what are your thoughts about that?
So my POV on the situation is I really could care less about what happens with OpenAI. I care more about the precedent that it sets for the industry, um,
Right.
which I think is maybe a little too early to tell.
The
Um,
industry being the nonprofit industry. Which industry are
uh,
you?
I I don't technically it's a company, I guess, trying to use this loophole of being a nonprofit, raising a bunch of money, right? So it could be any industry, but I'm mainly talking about tech.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
So they've been a nonprofit. I think that part of the sort of concern for a lot of people is that OpenAI started out as a nonprofit. All of a sudden, they started raising money as a for-profit company. Microsoft has been a big investor. They've had multiple rounds of investment from VCs. Their latest round, they raised money at a $500 billion valuation. And obviously, all these investors are investing with the expectation of profits, and they're expecting them to maybe someday become a publicly traded company. All of that is not possible if you're a nonprofit. So this conversion to a for-profit entity was expected by many, and like lots of people, including Microsoft, have been putting billions of dollars behind it. So, um, yeah, I don't know what kind of precedent this sets for nonprofits, but it is definitely very, very interesting. Now, one of the things that I found interesting is that they're becoming a for-profit but a public benefit corporation, which is slightly different than a typical corporation in that their charter actually has to have some kind of public benefit. And OpenAI has essentially said they're sort of researching AGI, the artificial general intelligence, for the benefit of humanity. So they are actually integrating that into their charter, which is pretty cool. Um, and then they're making sure that it benefits everyone. And then they're still going to have a nonprofit arm, which is going to own roughly 26% of the the for-profit entity, and still sort of like controls it in some way, maybe through its board. But that 26% is going to make the nonprofit arm worth roughly 120 something billion dollars, which is going to be one of the largest nonprofits in the world. Um, so that is also very fascinating, and how they use that money, or I mean, it's not cash that they can use, but as the company gets bigger, it might even become a bigger pile of investments. You would expect some percentage of that to be spent on an annual basis as they can like sell stock in the public company and use that money. So that's fascinating. Um,
One other piece
Basically, yeah, go
talking
ahead.
about the public benefit side of things, the way the product is already set up, it pretty much acts like a public benefit where you don't even need an account to use it. You could just go to the website and ask it anything. Um, you don't need to pay, you don't need to log in. They even have a phone. If you don't even use the internet, they have a phone number you can call 1-800 ChatGPT.
Yeah,
Use it that way
yeah.
as well. So they make it very accessible.
I just realized I have completely failed on the audio side of things. And Adrian, I don't know if you can tell my audio is better or worse than before, but I'm fixing that right now. So I'm just
We're doing it
connecting my.
live.
Um,
It's all good.
Let me real quick change my audio external microphone. Okay, I don't know if that sounds any better or not, but hopefully, if anybody was sort of
That's much
listening
better.
podcast side, it's slightly better. All right, so the other thing that this does, by the way, is it makes Microsoft officially own a pretty significant chunk that's worth, again, roughly $130 billion at the last valuation. Microsoft's shares went up as a result of that, like owning a $130 billion chunk of the fastest growing company in history is a pretty big deal. And there's, good chance OpenAI is going to become $1 trillion or even larger company someday. So Microsoft owning 27% of that is pretty cool. And then 47% of the company, the remaining 47%, is owned by other investors and OpenAI employees and various different people. Um, so that change is super fascinating. One thing about OpenAI uh, that concerns me, and this is sort of like this might lead to another subject that we have on our agenda, which is the AI bubble, right? Uh, the way in which, okay, so as part of this, by the way, it's become apparent that OpenAI is um, expected to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 or 13 billion dollars of revenue this year, and uh, it's like almost three times last year. So the growth rate is also astronomical, right? Going from like four billion to 12 billion. Um, but essentially, it's a $12 billion revenue run rate company that has these enormous commitments with Microsoft, for example, for $250 billion, with Nvidia for 100 billion, with AMD for 100 billion, with Oracle for like 300 billion, with Broadcom for another like 60 billion or something. It has over $800 billion of purchase commitments with other companies over the next few years, and like the duration of the next few years is sort of like a little bit unknown, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 5 years ish. So to spend 800 billion over the next 5 years, I don't know what kind of growth curve you need to have, but that just seems like a lot of spending commitments that these other companies are sort of like starting to count on, and I'm not sure if it can spend that kind of money. And I don't know if you've had any sort of thoughts about that. And is this where we sort of start hitting the wall in terms of the AI bubble bursting to some degree,
Yeah.
or at least like maybe getting adjusted to reality?
Yeah. It's so hard to know. It's hard to know. Obviously, markets are always going to correct. The difference between this and the dot com bubble, in my opinion, is there's more value here
Oh,
over the top,
100%.
right? So like
100%.
there are differences, but that doesn't mean there's not a bubble. And it's also hard to know what's
Also,
going to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just like comparison to the dot com. I don't think it's comparable. Like almost nothing has been comparable to the dot com bubble because a lot of that was also like companies and money being spent by VCs on companies that had no revenue. And this is a lot of companies that actually have revenue spending the money. So there's definitely differences there. But I'm
Yeah, I
sorry,
think
continue.
I think the reason why people jump to that comparison is just because it's two potential tech bubbles, even
Right.
though a lot of the underlying reasoning and like what's going on is very different.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the other point I was going to say is like you if it is a bubble, you also don't necessarily know what's going to cause it to pop because it could be an external factor, that you know
Yep.
brings the house of cards down. Not saying that that it is a bubble. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm also not, and because I don't know as an investor, I'm not that in the AI stuff.
Yeah.
So
You know what's funny is that as an investor, if OpenAI was a public company, and let's say it was traded at roughly a $500 billion valuation, I don't actually think that that is out of line for how fast OpenAI is growing, how much reach it has with like now over 800 million daily active users and 12 billion of revenue growing at like 300% annualized growth rate. Um, I might be an investor in a publicly traded OpenAI at a $500 billion valuation. But what concerns me is the spend commitments that they're making with these other companies, and these other companies uh, expecting that revenue to come. And I don't know what kind of commitments are those loose commitments, like, oh, we expect to spend 100 billion here, 100 billion there, 300 billion there, or or is it like contractual commitments? And if it's contractual, that would be very concerning. But if it's sort of like a loose commitment, yeah, Oracle, we expect to use $300 billion worth of your data center facilities over the next 5 years or whatever. Um, that would be fine, but contractual commitments would not be fine.
Well, my next follow-up question has to be if you're interested in potentially owning OpenAI if they were a public company, there is a
So,
public company that owns 27% of
oh,
OpenAI.
Microsoft.
So, any interest in investing in Microsoft then?
Yeah, so no, and I'll tell you why. Because that got priced into Microsoft stock pretty early on when they announced that they were like investing in OpenAI.